Alrighty, so we are diving into our next unit for math, and this unit is about ratios and proportions. So our first lesson for today is going to be talking about something called factor puzzles, which is probably something you've never done before. But before we get there, let's talk a little bit about multiplication tables and multiplication charts. At the very top here, you see there are three different symbols for multiplication. There's an X, there's a little star, and there's a dot. All three of those represent the multiplication sign. So there's two words for us to focus on for today's lesson. One is factor, and another one is product. Let's talk first about, factor. A factor is one of two or more numbers multiplied to make a product. So the factors of 30 in this problem would be 6 and 5. 6 and 5 are both factors of 30 because 6 times 5 equals 30. Another factor of 8 would be 4 times 2. They're both factors because they can be multiplied together to create 8, and they can both be divided equally into 8. And the last example is the number 42. Two factors of 42 would be 7 and 6 because both numbers can be divided by 42 and multiplied together equals 42. Product is just a word that we use when we're talking about the answer of a multiplication problem. So the product of 6 and 5 is 30. The product of 4 and 2 is 8. And the product of 7 and 6 is 42. So we're going to try to use that word product as much as possible when we're talking about multiplication problems. Sorry about that. Mr. Brooks was banging on my window and distracted me in the middle of my video. So anyways, that's a little bit of an introduction to our lesson for today, which we're talking about factor puzzles. So before we talk about factor puzzles, we need to understand the two words rows and columns. So you may have seen something like this before called a multiplication chart. And normally all of these squares are filled in with numbers. So what you do is you take the numbers up here, which would be the rows, and you multiply it by the number on the left side, which would be our columns. So if I multiply my row number by my column number, that'll give me a product. So let's say I take the number 6 and I multiply here by the number 5. This number, if I wrote it in there, should be written as 30. Because my row is 6, my column is 5, multiplied together gets me 30. And if I did the same thing with, I could do 5 here, come down to 6 here, same thing, my product is 30. So we could do this with all of the numbers, and I could multiply here starting with 1 and moving up. Okay, and what we're going to focus on is kind of looking for those patterns and those little tricks to help us fill out our factor puzzles. So let's try some practice. I'd like you to get out your math workbook at this time. If you need to pause the video, that's fine, and open it up to page 5. So on page 5, you're going to follow along with me and you're going to fill in everything correctly. So on page 5, you should see two tables. You should see table 1 with multiple colors, and you should see table 2 with multiple colors. Now, the colors are both vertical on the left side and horizontal on the right side to show you the different patterns. What you should notice is if you go vertically, we have a pattern where we go down our ones, and this simply goes from 1 to 9. And every time we go over, all we're doing is doubling, tripling, quadrupling, timesing by 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9s. And we're simply adding by those factors. So if you notice, these are all factors of 8 and 9, 7, 6, etc. So that's what a multiplication chart looks like. So at the bottom it says, write the missing factors and the missing product. So you should have something like this on the right-hand side, and this is called a factor puzzle. We have a 6 on the left-hand side, we have a 10 on the right-hand side, we have a 21 below the 6, and then we have a blank spot, which is what we need to figure out. So using my multiplication chart, I'm going to start and find my 6, which is over here. Right here. Okay, I'm going to find my 6. And I notice the two numbers that get me to 6 are 3 and 2. Now, before I write in 3 and 2, I want to also find the number 10. 10 is multiplied by 5 and 2. And then I find 21. Notice it creates a square here. Okay? And this is the missing number that we're looking for to complete our square. So it looks like our missing number is 35. Okay. And now I'm going to fill out the numbers around 6, 10, 21, and 35. So these numbers here are the numbers that we're multiplying by our rows, our columns and our rows. So here, let's start with the number 6. We had to multiply 3 times 2 to get 6. So my 3 goes here in my row, and my column is 2. Same thing for number 21. I'm going to look over here. It looks like 7 is in my column, and 3 is already written on my row. Same thing below here. 7 times what gets us 21? That will be 3. I'm going back up here to 10. 2 times what gets us 10? And that would be 5. And I'll give you a hint here. The numbers that are on here at the top of the columns or on the rows are the same numbers below here. So 35 goes in the top, 35 goes in the bottom. 2 and 7 go on the left-hand side over here, and 2 and 7 go on the right side over here. So if I multiply 5 times 2, that gets me 10. 3 times 2 gets me 6. 3 times 7 gets me 21. 7 times 3 gets me 21. 5 times 7 gets me 35. And 5 times 2 gets me to 10. So my factor puzzle missing number is 35, and it's 3, 5, 2, and 7. So you should be filling this into your factor puzzle at the bottom of page 5. So if you need to take a second to fill all of that information in, I would pause the video, fill it out, and then continue watching. Now, you might be feeling a little bit overwhelmed, a little bit confused, okay? And that's all right. We're going to practice a little bit more here. Now this time, we're going to use multiplication charts that are not filled in. But we're still going to be able to find our answer relatively simply. So if I find the number 6 here and my number 21. Now, I want to find a similar factor, a number that goes into both 6 and 21. And it looks like my number that goes into both 6 and 21 would be 3. So if I put 3 there, 3 times what number gets me to 6? And what number is here in my row? It would be the number 2, and I would write it here. Same thing for the number 21. 21 has a factor of 3. 3 times what number gets us to 21? That would be 7. So remember, I told you, whatever numbers we put on the top row, we want to also write it on the bottom row. So this will help us solve the rest of our puzzle. So 3 times 2 gets us 6. 2 times what gets us 16? And that would be 8. So if I find 8 over here in my column, and I find 2 in my row, and I draw my line all the way down to 16, that's my answer. And I want to fill in the square here and find that missing number. So I know I'm going to be multiplying together 8 times 7, which will get me 56. And remember, whatever you write on the left-hand side goes on the right-hand side as well. So 27's on the top, 27's on the bottom, 38 or 3 and 8 is on the left-hand side, and 3 and 8 is on the right-hand side. So they're both matching, top and bottom and side to side. My missing number is 56 in my factor puzzle. So turn to page 6 in your workbook, and that would be example number 1 at the top. So fill in your multiplication chart, the two numbers that you multiplied together to get 6 and to get 21, to get 16, and then to get to our missing number, which stands for n. And then fill in the factor puzzle to the right of that as well. Again, if you need time to do this, pause the video now and fill it in for that first practice problem. So I would like you to actually try this example completely on your own, practicing filling in and finding that missing number in our factor puzzle. So pause the video and take a few minutes right now to fill that in at the bottom of page 6 in your workbook. All right, if you're continuing watching, that means that you've completed the bottom of page 6, you completed your factor puzzle, and you have your missing number here. So here's how this is going to work. I'm going to start with these two numbers, 35 and 15. And I'm going to ask myself, what number can go into both 35 and into 15? And the answer is 5. So I'm going to write 5 here, and I'm going to write 5 here, because they both can go into 35 and 15. If I want to use my multiplication chart, I would find my 5 in my column, and I would find 35 in my row. So I'd count by tens. 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30, 35. Should be right here. So 5 times what number gets us to 35? 7. So that means my 7 goes up here as well. Okay. Now I'm going to do the same thing with the number 15. So let me erase this board quickly so you can see this. Okay, I'm going to do the same thing again. So I'm going to take 5 and I'm going to find that, and I'm going to count by 5s. 5, 10, 15 until I find 15, which is here. Draw my arrow up to my row, and it looks like 3 is my missing number. And 3 goes here as well. 3 times what number gets me to 6? That would be 2. 2 also goes here. So my last step is to multiply 7 times 2, which my number would be 14. So 14 should be your missing number in your factor puzzle. If you got that correct, awesome job. If you did not get it correct, that's okay. We're going to continue practicing these later on. So what I'd like you to do at this time is I would like you to go to Compass Learning, go to manheimcentral.org, click the Students tab, go to View More, then click on Compass Learning. Log in using your regular username and password, enter in your school, and then take the ratio and proportions pretest. If you finish early, work on the even questions on page 7 of your workbook. So that would be questions 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, and 14. So you have 7 total questions to do on page 7 of your workbook. And you are able to complete page 7 with a partner of your choice.